Lots of people, for a variety of reasons, try to teach themselves piano. Do you think this is even possible? Well, stay tuned for some ideas of how you might want to go about it. Are you sitting comfortably? Then let's begin. Hi, this is Tommy with Tommy's Piano Corner, the place for returning pianists, or indeed anybody who loves piano, to share tips and ideas of how to get the best from this great hobby. If it's your first trip here, then please do consider subscribing. Simply hit the little icon in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen now, and it's all done for you. Horowitz once famously said that the piano is probably the easiest instrument to play in the beginning, but the hardest to master in the end. So, would you think that teaching yourself is even possible? Well, there's a strange story about Richter, who, as you know, was a fantastic pianist, in that he was completely self-taught into his 20s. And even then, when he went to Neuhaus for lessons, Neuhaus very famously kept repeating that he taught Richter almost nothing. I firmly believe that you can teach yourself anything if you put your mind to it. When I was in my youth, I taught myself to speak French, and though I say so myself, to a far better standard than the people I ended up going to university with, who'd spent 2 extra years at school studying the subject with proper teachers. But that said, you then need to do a lot of extra work yourself, because you need to find out what it is you need to learn, and you need to work out how to apply all of those things. Of course, when you have a teacher, they'll do all of this for you, which is what you're paying them for. If you are considering the self-taught route, then there are a few things that I would take into consideration first, of course. Your previous musical knowledge, your current level on the piano, your age, previous self-teaching experience, where you want to go with the piano. You know, for example, if you already play an instrument and you can already read music, then you'll find learning piano slightly easier than if you've no prior musical knowledge at all. Similarly, if you have a fairly good level on piano, say grade 5 and above, then you'll likely find that teaching yourself will be slightly easier than if you've never ever played before. And I think that younger students will find it more difficult to teach themselves than older students, simply because I don't think that our education system really teaches you how to be a self-starting learner until you get more to a university age. If you have taught yourself things in the past, then you've already learned the skill of how to find out how to learn and how to look things up and how to study things on your own. So again, you might find learning the piano a little bit easier than if you've never taught yourself something before. But of course, if your ambition is to become a world-class pianist, then to be honest, aside maybe the example of Richter that I used earlier, it would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to achieve that kind of goal without a world-class teacher. Now then, let's consider what teaching yourself actually implies. It's learning how to read music, both the treble and bass clefs, learning the correct physical movements at the piano, learning how to work out which fingers to use, learning, of course, how to practice. Learning how to control the instrument. Don't forget, aside the keys, there are also the pedals to think about. Learning how to add musicality to your playing, so that it's not just mechanical. And of course, learning how to properly self-critique your outputs. Looking at just a couple of these, for example, learning to read music is a whole challenge all on its own. First, you have the notation and the significance of all that notation. Then you've got lots of other markings in various foreign languages, depending on the composer, that you need to work out. In short, a significant learning curve, made even more difficult on the piano, in that you need to learn it for both hands and not just one note at a time, as with many instruments. Secondly, there's finding the correct physical gestures to use whilst you're playing the piano. You know, how do you hold your hands? How do you hold your fingers? How do you move your arms, your elbows, even your shoulders? If you get these things wrong initially, it doesn't make very much difference because the music you're playing is so simple, it honestly doesn't matter. But you'll find that as music gets progressively more difficult, then these bad habits will prevent you from being able to progress, and undoing them takes an awful lot of hard work, which I've found out to my cost. And of course, if you're teaching yourself, then you need to find out all of this information and work out how to apply it. You know, for example, going back to the example of French, it's one thing to learn some grammar and some vocabulary. It's quite something else to work out how to turn this into spoken words that sound authentic. Of course, in music, just as in French, you also need a way to find out if you're actually getting it right. If you have a teacher, then they're there to help you with this. But if you don't, what are you going to do? Luckily for us, now in the digital age, there are lots and lots of resources to help us with all of these problems. There are plenty of method books for piano. Take the Alfred set, for example, and getting hold of them is simplicity itself via Amazon and the like. Super helpful if you're starting from scratch. There are also plenty of other types of tuition books, such as Melanie Spanswick's course, aimed at people returning to piano after a break. A great support if you're continuing your studies alone. You'll find books on the subject of practicing the piano, plus all sorts of volumes of exercises to help build technique, if you want to use exercises, that is. There are lots of YouTube channels offering piano lessons covering all different musical styles. A great addition to books in that you can see demonstrations. There are great social media groups. Take a look on Facebook and Reddit, for example, with ultra helpful people ready to offer advice. Invaluable if you want advice on your progress so far with something. And of course, filming and recording yourself is now super simple if you have a smartphone. Something you'll need to do often to check both how your playing sounds and whether or not you're using good or bad physical gestures. All of that said though, do proceed with caution. For example, there's a great debate about technical exercises between various pianists. There are those that believe passionately that if you don't do these exercises, you will never ever develop the technique to be able to play piano even half decently. Yet there is a whole other school of thought that believes that at best these technical exercises are a total waste of time, and at worst they're likely to be dangerous. And you're going to have to make up your own mind on what you think is the right way for you to go forward. You'll also come across conflicting schools of thought on something as basic as how are you supposed to move your thumb when you play. You'll come across things like thumb under and thumb over. And again, it'll be down to you to work out for yourself which advice do you think you're going to follow. If you seek advice on a Facebook group, then of course, how do you know whether the person giving you advice is really qualified to do so? So when you're told that you're moving your wrist too much or you're not moving your wrist enough, how do you know whether that's correct or not? How do you know whether the right way to fix the particular problem you have is to slow right down? Again, you have to take all of the advice on board, interpret it, and decide for yourself what you're going to do. And then let's come to musicality. You know, this is something that is ultra subjective. People might say, oh, you're playing too fast, or you're playing it too slow, or too much rubato, or not enough rubato, or too much dynamic, not enough dynamic. But if you search on YouTube, you'll find videos for very decent pianists playing various pieces of music in very different ways. So you can't always be sure that the way you're playing it is necessarily wrong. If there's one thing that I learned at university, then I think that it's that if you want to find out the answer to a question, the best way is to read as many different views on that question as you possibly can and weigh them up. Test out the theories. Be prepared to get things wrong and be prepared to work even harder to get them right afterwards. In general, I've come to the conclusion that with piano playing, there is no one size fits all. There's no one absolutely correct way of doing anything. It's very, very personal, and you need to work out for yourself what works for you. In short, would I recommend that you try teaching yourself? Well, personally, in my teens and early 20s, I had teachers that got me right up to grade 8. But then, since coming back to the piano just a few years ago, I've decided to go down the self-taught route, and I am enormously enjoying the process of learning how to learn. I've invested an awful lot of time and a little bit of money into this journey, and I'm finding progress is a little slow, but that said, I'm still trying to break through many of the technical walls that I hit that stopped me playing altogether all those years ago. So I certainly think that teaching yourself is eminently possible these days, especially with all the resources that I mentioned earlier. If you're prepared to put in the time, do the research, and from time to time trust your own instincts about which advice to ignore or to follow, then I'm sure you'll find it an absolutely fascinating project. That said, I don't think that it's for everybody. Some people won't really be able to put up with the uncertainty of knowing whether or not they're doing something right. Also, not everybody has either the patience or the time to sit through hours and hours of YouTube videos, to read book after book, blog after blog, and to try and find out all of these things. And don't forget, all of that is before you've even sat down at the piano to start practicing. To sum up, I'd say if you can find and afford a good piano teacher, especially if you're a beginner, then it's an absolutely well worthwhile investment. But of course, you need to find a teacher who's willing to support you in the things that you might want to do. When Alan Rusbridger decided to learn Chopin's Ballade No. 1, you'll remember the review I did of that book quite recently, he had to convince his teacher, who had certain misgivings as to whether this wasn't really a piece too far for Alan to learn, that he wanted to learn it, and the teacher then said, okay, if you want, we'll work on it together. If for whatever reason a teacher really isn't an option for you at the moment, then I sincerely hope that the ideas I've given you in this video will be enough to help get you started on the learning journey for this fantastic hobby. If you're not already, then please do remember to subscribe to Tommy's Piano Corner before you leave. Click that little bell icon so that you're notified of new videos as and when they're released. I thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next week.